Started. Good evening. It is 7:30 on Wednesday, the May 28th, and I'm calling this meeting of the Chelmsford Planning Board to order. My name is Chris LaValle, and I'm the chair of the board. Tonight we'll be following the posted agenda. This meeting is both in person and being televised live and recorded via Chelmsford Telemedia, and will be available on their website and YouTube. We do have Zoom for potential one member of the planning board. So Evan, if you can let me know when if Deirdre does join. Tonight we are missing Anita Tonini, and potentially Deirdre will be on Zoom or in person, potentially late. So, all right. So let's start with public input. Public input is limited to statements from the public relating to any issues within our jurisdiction that are not currently the subject of a pending or upcoming public hearing. Public comment on any public hearing will be heard at those public hearings. And Deirdre is coming now. So are there any members of the public who wish to speak? Seeing none, we'll move on to the first agenda item, the A&R number 690 Old Westford Road. And Evan, it's my understanding that they are requesting a continuance until June 11th. I will take a motion to continue.
So moved.
I'll second.
Mike made the motion, Deirdre seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Anita is not joining tonight.
Okay.
All right. Next item is Kate's Corner discussion continued. I have updated the slides with our information from last meeting. I have updated the manufacturing definitions based on the discussion last week or last meeting. We also received today an updated version from Lockheed Martin that they are suggesting. So what I've asked Evan to do is put the version we have for ultralight manufacturing up on the screen, and I can explain the differences. We don't have the text available to display, but it's roughly the same. So one difference is that the part about the manufacturing operations needing to be fully enclosed, I moved that section up a little bit as the second sentence. The prior version and the Lockheed Martin version had it a little bit later. I just felt it flowed better. So it's one change. The Lockheed Martin recommended version has no dock limits per facility. They also are recommending to remove the explicit limit on tractor trailers for distribution and during business hours. So that's the other difference. Another difference is that the Lockheed Martin version has the maximum facility size removed. And they did add to the examples section, they specifically added prototyping, and they added the phrase, examples include but are not limited to. So I wanted to talk specifically about those 4 recommendations and see if folks had any thoughts on those.
So I have a question about the tractor trailer verbiage that's in there, because tractor trailer makes a lot more noise compared to the box trucks and vans, and also allows for a lot more material to be moved at once, you know, leaving the trucks running longer, stuff's going in and out of them. So I think you had picked up before, it was the other town that used the similar wording about the smaller vehicles. And I think for me, that's a huge thing because of size. And if we're trying to make it light manufacturing, why do you need the big tractor trailers? And then if they're going to if we allow tractor trailers and we have the whole thing about removing the business hours, then they could be going all night. So that's my concern.
Yep. Other thoughts?
I'll just offer a couple thoughts.
Yes.
So there's nowhere within any town bylaw or regulation that regulates hours of operation anywhere. And generally speaking, even when the planning board is issuing a special permit, I can't recall the planning board applying hours of operation. So if you have a fast food drive-through up in Drum Hill, that means there's nothing preventing them within any current rules or regulations from operating 24/7. We talked previously about there's businesses that may run a third shift. As far as the tractor trailer, my only comment on that is sometimes a distributor may be going to multiple businesses. So remember, not all the more often than not, the tractor trailers aren't really even owned by the business.
Yep.
That may be a case with, ultralight manufacturing businesses. I don't know enough about it, but I think if you're able to, I think you had a version that limited the number of docks or loading bays may address that issue. But trucking it's just, we're not working with a clean slate.
Yep.
We've talked about some of the neighborhoods that we're contemplating, and it's not an ideal situation, but I think with the other aspects of this definition, the major business complex, and where you apply it, that should be enough control.
Yeah, I agree. I think that even in the mill area that we were talking about, where there is no heavy manufacturing, I have seen tractor trailers making deliveries there. And so, like you said, they may be going to multiple places.
We can't make their schedule.
Yeah. So I have been on the fence about that specific one.
I think tractor trailer delivery is different than a tractor trailer allowed to pick up product. So if something was allowed to drop off, I mean, that's usually a quicker stop than somebody loading up a tractor trailer for being taken out and it's being loaded for longer periods.
Evan, when you were talking about the tractor trailers, were you referring to like you could have a business where you could have trailers parked on site? They may not be going in and out.
No,
but,
I'm talking about with a cab for
Okay.
delivery or,
Okay.
drop off or pickup.
I mean, is it currently an issue, tractor trailers in the Lockheed location? I haven't heard anything about that.
You guys are changing this for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Not just for them.
I know,
so-
but I'm just wondering
Oh, I don't know.
if it's a problem currently, because I haven't heard it
I mean, at least
mentioned.
speaking for town hall, very rarely will we get complaints about the operations of loading docks. It's usually dumpsters. And then the amount of trucking. But the overnight or the nighttime operation of the loading area, very rarely do we get complaints. On the other hand, we don't have a lot of businesses that are running, off regular business hours.
And usually if a business isn't operating off hours, they're not going to be
Right.
accepting deliveries
Correct.
off hours either. Other thoughts? I do like the addition of the not limited to
Yeah.
and the addition of the prototyping, because I think that fits what we were trying to do.
Yeah.
So I would like to include that.
Yes, I would agree.
And if we were gonna limit the docks and/or the size, which I'm not suggesting that we should, but like, what are we thinking that we would limit it to?
Well, I know in the Tewksbury definition, they are clear with saying that they have van or small truck for transit. Tractor trailer use limited to delivery only, no overnight parking or distribution via tractor trailer.
Yeah.
I don't know what other towns use, what type of verbiage related to that.
Most loading docks that I've seen that do accept deliveries have 2, maybe 3 at the most.
2 or 3 docks.
Yeah. The ones that I've seen, especially around town.
Mm-hmm.
Joel, you're quiet.
Which one are we going with now? Is the one we're looking at, or
The one we're looking at and
Adding in.
talking about the suggestions of the changes from Lockheed. Because it's roughly the same definition
Very
with these
similar.
small changes.
right? And were they suggesting something about the tractor trailer?
They're suggesting removing the limit on tractor trailers for distribution and removing during business hours. So their exact
They s-
sentence was, let me pull it up.
Operational characteristics generally include limited loading infrastructure and tractor trailer use as compared to more intense manufacturing, right?
Yeah, so they talk about limited loading infrastructure and tractor trailer use.
So what does that mean, though? That
That's
seems ambiguous.
part of the problem that we were wrestling with the original one, is that there's a little bit of language that's open to interpretation.
But I mean, I think the solution to put a number is somewhat arbitrary or capricious. Like, I mean, we're gonna have an opportunity to review it in the context of major business complex. So we can define limited. If it's 52, it's clearly not limited, you know?
Well, assuming it's over 20,000 square feet. If it's under, we wouldn't be.
Well, then how many docks can you have if it's under 20,000 square feet?
So in a manufacturing facility, a lot of times they'll put dock doors along one wall, like, and it can be a lot of them right next to each other to a space, and sometimes they're spaced out around, but you could have a complete wall if that's how they want to build. All depends on who's doing it.
But like, what would they be doing in there that they would need a wall of large tractor trailer truck bays?
A lot of material coming in and going out, possibly at the same time. Material movement is usually why.
Well, I mean,
I don't have such a big issue with the number of dock doors because depending on the size and what the definition is, I don't think that there would need to be, I don't think there'd be a ton on these. You'd have a larger manufacturing facility that potentially could have more, which wouldn't be your ultralight.
but I mean, if it says limited, then we get to interpret that in the context of a permit, right? So I don't necessarily see the advantage of being that micromanaging.
Joel, you're still quiet.
I mean, I think I'm leaning a little bit towards keeping the operational characteristics generally include limited loading infrastructure and also the limited tractor trailer use. And I think along the lines of what Deirdre was suggesting, leaving it at that and leaving it to us to decide what's particularly relevant, because in the case of Lockheed, I could see that they would potentially be loading product onto a tractor trailer for delivery to, I mean, they support, you know, other parts of Raytheon. They're actually putting the things together. So that wouldn't surprise me, and you wouldn't want to limit that just straight out. But that would certainly be something that we would look at, and we would say, somebody wants to have 10 bays, then we may say, we don't think that's limited loading infrastructure. You would want the more detail, I think, to help yourself in an appeal. But I think in that case, I think being less specific might be a little more helpful. Those are my thoughts.
So if you left it ambiguous, though, like that, how would you limit tractor-trailer use by limiting dock doors? Is that what you're thinking? Like you say, you're only allowed 3.
Well,
so therefore
limited loading infrastructure, so then I wouldn't be necessarily even restricting myself to dock bays. But nonetheless, certainly I could use number of dock bays if they come in with some number. We would say, well, we don't think that's a limited loading infrastructure.
Because you
And
couldn't have control over I don't know how this board would control what type of vehicles was coming in and picking things up, right? You can't, if you leave it ambiguous like that, it's not going to matter. They can come in and out with whatever they have. You could limit it by dock doors because they can't have more than X amount of trucks there at the same time. So
You can also limit it by parking and the circulation of the parking lot, too.
Actually, when we were doing the whole warehouse thing, it turns out that particularly in some facilities, if they have very automated facilities, they can have very high turnaround. So you can actually get a lot of trucks in and out with just a few dock bays. So the number of dock bays is in itself strictly related to truck traffic, and not only that, but also the Institute for Transportation Engineers does not use dock bays as a parameter for determining traffic. They use size.
right. That's kind of like why I was asking, though, because I think what we're saying is, what did the word say again? It said limited.
Can you use the microphone?
Did I need to just move it closer? What did it say in regards to limited?
So their version says operational characteristics generally include limited loading infrastructure and tractor-trailer use as compared to more intense manufacturing operations.
So how would that second portion be limited?
Which portion?
I mean, what
The
are you
tractor-trailer
proposing we
part.
do? You can only have 4 an hour, or?
Well, no, I don't think we can. That's why I was saying by size.
Okay.
You can limit like tractor trailer versus like box truck, van, things like that. That's my question. I don't know with the definition. Because Tewksbury has definite sizes with their stuff.
You could limit it on a case-by-case basis, I would think, with,
Do they bring that to the planning board?
well, that would be the next thing we have to talk about. The current zone has light manufacturing as by right. If we wanted to, we could do both light manufacturing or we could exclude light manufacturing or make it by special permit. And then for ultralight, we could potentially do by right or by special permit. So we could have both types of manufacturing in the zone by special permit, potentially. Or exclude the light manufacturing and include the ultralight by special permit or by right. If it's by right, it likely would not come to the planning board if it's under 20,000 square feet. If it's over, it would because of the special permit.
I think at 20,000 square feet, you're generally not concerned about, or you're willing to take whatever amount of traffic that ends up being. You're assuming that you aren't going to have a heavy amount of traffic associated with a building that small. That presumably is the
Yep.
reason for that.
Well, what do we think about that? Ultralight being, are people leaning towards having it be by right or by special permit?
Evan, if we do a special permit for this, what would it mean for current businesses that fall in this category in these zones? They'd be grandfathered in?
They
Grandfathered in.
become pre-existing non-conforming, and if they were to expand, they would need a special permit.
Okay.
I mean, if we're trying to attract this type of business, it seems to me it would be beneficial to make this, that we're trying to lean towards, by right.
That's what I would think.
Yeah.
Make this by right, make the light manufacturing special
Special permit.
permit, and assume that anything under 20,000 square feet with this definition is likely going to have limited loading infrastructure and tractor trailers anyway.
Yeah.
And they still can't go in and do heavy manufacturing
Right,
because it's not allowed.
right. So are people okay with that? I saw a lot of nodding as I was saying it.
Reasonable to me.
No, it's reasonable.
Okay.
All right.
And then do we, what, okay, so we said yes to the,
So let me summarize. So we will keep their recommended language of operational characteristics generally include limited loading infrastructure and tractor trailer use as compared to more intense manufacturing operations. Remove the dock limits. And I'm going to recommend, given what we just talked about, remove the maximum size limitation. Make this definition by right and make the light manufacturing by special permit. And the size of this one is essentially under 20,000 square feet by right, over 20,000 square feet by special permit because of the major business complex. And then we have a little bit of leeway on the capacity, the volume, traffic, things like that.
I think that's good.
Sarita, are you okay with that?
Sure. Good, yes.
Evan?
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
All right. I will watch the video again so I get the right wording, and then I will type it up and get it ready for the public hearing. All right. I think we were all set on the zone. We're all set on the definition. I do want to hear one last time if there's anyone from the public who wishes to speak on this topic. Anyone
Or
from
from Lockheed?
Lockheed or the neighborhood?
Ann Sobleski from Prince LaBelle for Lockheed Martin. So thank you for making those changes. I did just want to clarify, we do have tractor trailer trucks come and pick up materials from our facility, and no one has ever complained about it in the past. And that was one of the concerns. Another concern that we had was in terms of the potential restrictions on operating hours. We run multiple shifts, and so that was the reason for that concern. The one other thing that I would just comment on in terms of the language about detectable noise, odor, smoke, heat, glare, vibration at the property line. I mean, it is possible to say, nothing over, applicable limits at the detectable just is kind of a difficult word to have as your standard. Detectable to whom? So for example, like the DEP has the DEP has noise limits. And so that's a quantifiable standard that exists. But if that is something that, is potentially more than detectable, but it is a applicable official limit or standard. So our suggestion would be something not quite detectable, but something that had a little bit more of a measurable quality to it. So, thank you.
I'm actually going to recommend we don't change that piece because that has been in the current bylaw without any problems.
Chelmsford has a noise ordinance as well, right?
Yeah. So that would be applicable for the noise.
We also have environmental protection standards that cover a certain amount of this stuff too.
Okay. Yeah, and that part of the wording has not been changed from the current definition, so I would like to keep that the same. Okay. All right. So I think we'll talk about it next meeting, but essentially I think we're all set with this for Kate's Corner. We can close this out and then move on to the next area that we wanted to talk about in that mill section. So we can talk about that one next meeting. apply this definition and the zoning to that and see what we get. All right.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
All right. For the next item on the agenda, it is going to be the clarification of the planning board as it relates to managed growth strategy objective of the strategic plan and the clarification and discussion on statements made at the May 12th, May 19th, actually, select board meeting. Before we get into the strategic plan itself, I did want to address some more general comments that were made at the select board meeting as it related to the planning board. It was mentioned that the planning board wants to constrain growth and not encourage growth. I'm only going to speak for myself on this one, but I do not feel that's accurate. Based on the meeting discussions that we've had and discussions with people on this board, I think what we want is an appropriate growth and development in appropriate places in town. The planning board at that meeting was essentially also blamed for the defeat of the Davis Company's Riverneck Road project, the 129 overlay changes proposed to town meeting, and the recent 300 Billerica Road Beehive project. And it was stated that our board can never find a project that is good enough. To be clear, the Riverneck Road Distribution Center was rejected by a prior planning board when most of the current members were not on the board. Many people felt that it was a bad project that was going to be detrimental to the town. In fact, town meeting overwhelmingly approved a citizen's petition for a townwide prohibition on that type of distribution center that was being proposed there. The planning board at that time actually had nothing to do with that citizen's petition. The recent 129 overlay changes were defeated by town meeting and not the planning board. The 300 Billerica Road project was also not denied by the planning board. In a preliminary meeting where the applicant presented his idea, we requested that the developer not only provide amenities like a movie theater, fitness center, and dining facility to residents of that building, but he also provide amenities that are accessible to the town as our BAOD requires. And it seems like that request was too much, and he never brought it back for a public hearing. Yes, the Massachusetts general laws do require planning boards to have a strategic plan, and we do have one. It's the 2020 master plan. The planning board also should be using the town charter as its guide. And we do that, as indicated by our stated mission. The planning board strives to guide land use management that preserves the character and integrity of this town. Planning board also has two hats. One in which we can approve or deny projects in the regulatory hat. In that role, we cannot be looking to perform our planning function or to promote economic growth. We're obligated to evaluate the project per applicable law, bylaws, rules, and regulations at the federal, state, and local levels. If people aren't happy with the decisions we make based on those regulations, bylaws, and rules, then people in town are more than welcome to bring proposals for changes. And town meeting votes on those, not the planning board. The planning board can bring, and we are bringing, many changes to zoning as we're able to get to them. We've been quite inundated with the MBTA zoning and the ADU laws that the state has pushed on us. So we haven't had a chance to address many of the things we wanted to. So given that our board has a 2020 master plan, we use that in the town charter as our guide. Our stated mission is to preserve the character and integrity of the town. Is it any wonder that we have a number of questions and need clarification when we are assigned the objective in the town strategic plan without any presentation or explanation before the board? It feels like we were just lobbed a hot potato because no one else knew what to do with it. If the town-wide strategic plan committee, as Paul Cohen mentioned in the May 19th select board meeting, could not resolve the issue of what does the town want in terms of growth going forward, how were we expected to be able to resolve that question? So with all of that being said, our discussion last meeting was essentially the first time many of us had seen the town strategic plan and have been able to discuss it in our planning board roles. Unfortunately, we did so without much context and information around the plan itself, who was assigned which objective, and based on the discussion at that May 19th select board meeting, I felt some of that discussion was misinterpreted. So I invited a number of key people tonight for the two-way discussion. I would like to get clarity on the goal of the managing growth objective, which topics we are assigned as a planning board, and to get a little bit of background from the town manager, Aaron, and Badri about what the expectations are on this board, and to see how we can work together to further the strategic plan. Because I did not share this statement with any other planning board members, I would like to give the other planning board members an opportunity to respond to either anything in this statement or anything at the select board meeting.
I have some things I'd like to comment on. First of all, I want to say that the comments that were made about the planning board were somewhat ironic, because the charter also states the planning board shall have the responsibility to make studies of the resources, possibilities, and needs of the town, and to make plans for the development of the town. And we have been talking since February about getting a grant specifically for the purpose of looking at what kinds of ways can we impact zoning in order to promote economic development that also preserves the character of the town, which we discussed when our liaison was here at the last meeting, but that was not mentioned in the discussion before the select board in the liaison report. I think that the thing that troubles me from the things that were said in the select board meeting is, one, the impact that has on liaison relationships overall. When your liaison report misrepresents the board, when, for example, it was said, we can't say no to everything, and I kind of feel like the default is to say no to everything. That is, that the planning board's default is to say no to everything. Just an even cursory examination of our record shows that we do not say no to everything, and in fact, we say no to very few things. And also that then liaison report then turns into attack on the board. I think that has a chilling relationship on the liaison relationship between our boards. Two, it affects the board's focus. Now, instead of focusing on a particular application, we're going to be distracted, because now we're going to be thinking about how are we going to be perceived in the things that we say. If there's something that we don't like, if there's something that we feel should be denied. On the other hand, now we're being asked to consider, well, how is a developer going to view that? Is the developer not going to want to bring business to town? Where it was said that basically the survival of the town is at peril because of the way the planning board is perceived. I think that causes a general impression that we are essentially the cause of what could potentially endanger the town, and that therefore, it would only be natural that we would start to wonder, well, now how is this going to be viewed? But most importantly is that it communicates a lack of support, which is important particularly when there is pending litigation, which there is with this board. It communicates a weakness, a lack of support, and I think that's something that also could be that would be considered by applicants when they bring their applications, knowing that this board essentially has been put on its heels by the select board, by the town manager. And so I think that the things that were said, I think that one thing that certainly could help is if there is at least some statement, at least that the select board does support the planning board in terms of the decisions that it makes, and support in terms of funding for litigation and so forth are things that will be still provided. So that's all I have to say.
Anyone else?
I have just a couple quick things. One is that I view my role as a planning
Deirdre,
board member
Could you?
Yeah, sorry.
Thanks.
to be kind of like a steward And it's a balancing act between the interests of the town, the interests of the neighborhood, the interests of the businesses who we hope to help the town thrive. And so there's a lot of sometimes conflicting interests that we have to weigh in the context of the, zoning law and the charter. And I agree that things that were said and the way they were said were not at all collegial. I guess we'll leave it at that. And then the last minor-ish point is that I was very excited, and I know a number of other people were, about the Beehive project. I thought it was great, and I wanted them to put a little coffee shop because, I wasn't the one who brought that up, but I thought when it was brought up that would be a good additional aspect of the development project, and that the owner, if anything, didn't, or the applicant, if anything, didn't seem put off by that. I thought he said something to the effect of, we didn't want to ask for too much, so we didn't ask for that. But he didn't seem at all like that was a problem. And I didn't go back and look at that meeting. I just didn't have time. I meant to do it this afternoon. But I don't know what the vote was, but I thought it was,
Quite positive in my recollection.
6-1, maybe.
Quite positive.
6-1.
I want to say is when Beehive came up, I wasn't even on the board. I was sitting in the audience, and it was very, there was a lot of good communication there. And I think the only biggest concern you guys had was there are going to be chemicals, the residents above. Like, how do we make sure that this is safe for having residents? There was never, we don't want this. This is bad. This is not what we need. There was a lot of excitement on this board for that project. And yes, it was, hey, can we put a coffee shop in, or is there someplace else that we could put something for the community to bring people into the area? So when I saw the meeting and it's like, oh, they've pulled and now they're putting this in, I'm like, well, wait a minute, when did they pull? No one came back to the board or said anything about it, because when I sat in those seats, it was approved. It was, you guys really liked the project. So it was very, I didn't even know what to think when I heard that at the select board meeting, like, oh, when did this happen? Like,
Yeah.
when did this change? What made the change?
Yeah, I was just going to say, adding on to what Deirdre said, my recollection is that we were not, the board as a whole was not very negative. I don't even remember any comments that were that negative towards that proposal. I was looking forward because I thought those contractors would have a lot of, they'd have quite a market here in Chelmsford to perform their work. And I just want to say, I don't buy for 1 minute that we're perceived, the whole town is perceived negative because one developer didn't get their project approved on River Neck Road. I was not on the board at the time. I didn't have a vote on that. If I was that developer, I'd probably be upset if my project wasn't approved. But that's not why I ran for this position. I ran for it to represent the interests of the voters of Chelmsford. They want us here to ask questions that are intelligent, watch things, and not, I'm not here to see how fast I can put my hand up on a project until I know all of the one thing I've learned over the past 2 years or so is there's a lot of details involved, and it's incumbent upon us to ask questions. And I think we do have a difficult job, as others have said. We're trying to balance the interests of the town, also the citizens, and also private property owners that want to develop their property, and that's sometimes a difficult balancing act.
Anyone else wish to speak? Okay. All right. With that, we will actually move on to the strategic plan. We have a few links in the document. One is an article that I found from the New Hampshire Municipal Association talking about the secrets of successful small communities. It's a little older article, but it is an interesting read, talking about the role of planning boards and growth of communities. So I thought that would be a good shareable document. I also put together, based on some of my questions, a document. Evan, can you bring up that context and questions? So the first half of it is a little bit of discussion around managing growth. It talks about a lot of the things that are in the strategic plan, land use and zoning, infrastructure services. I think if you look at the details in here of what typically encompasses managing growth, it is a lot of that strategic plan. So that is one of my questions also about what the role of that first objective is. If you look at that first objective, it's developing a strategic growth plan. And if you look at or managing growth plan, and if you look at a lot of what's in the managing growth, it's what the strategic plan is. So I'm still not clear about what is expected of that managing growth plan if it's not the actual strategic plan. So that's one thing I would like to hear about tonight. If you scroll down to the questions and concerns, the first question is around that topic. What's the role of the planning board in that managing growth objective? The planning board is specifically called out in number 1 in that managing growth objective, in the managing growth goal objective 1, but it's not called out, and there's no ownership called out in 2, 3, 4, and 5. 2 and 3 under that objective are obviously the planning board, but the ownership of 4 and 5 is unclear. So if the planning board is owning the goal and the managing growth overall plan, it's unclear how the ownership of all of those fits in. So I'm really confused about the structure of all of this. And Objective 1 specifically states that it's asking the planning board to develop guiding principles and core values for each of the components listed. If you look at the rest of the strategic plan, all of that is community goals, guiding principles, and core values. So I'm not quite sure what the planning board is then supposed to develop beyond what's already in the strategic plan. And then many of the components listed under that objective are not in the planning board jurisdiction. They're in other areas, jurisdiction, various boards and commissions. And so it's, again, unclear of why the planning board was assigned to this specific objective when, in my opinion, it should be rolled up to a more umbrella group like a townwide task force,
Strategic planning committee.
a strategic planning committee or strategic implementation committee, something like that. So,
Are you talking about like zoning, environmental, open space?
yeah.
Yeah.
So all of those individual objectives roll up into the overall goal of managing growth and the managing growth plan. And we own, obviously, a couple of them, but not all of them. So I would like to get some clarification from the folks here, a little bit more context about what the expectations are, why the planning board was selected to lead this, and get a little bit more input on that. So if anyone is willing to step up and talk through it.
I'm Paul Cohen, town manager. If you'll forgive me the indulgence, I'm just disappointed at this point. Your previous agenda item regarding the comments at the select board meeting, we didn't have a dialogue. right? I know your planner asked for a dialogue and suggested an informal dialogue. And instead it was put on the agenda and still no dialogue. So instead we're talking at each other. And now we're starting this agenda item and we're making assertions rather than having a conversation. Look, folks, we've got to work together. Okay, we're not asking anybody to capitulate or to own things or to do anything. We're asking to work together as a community. And you had a member of the planning board on the strategic plan committee. He's sitting right there. And I'm sorry if he didn't inform you along the way or provide a sufficient understanding of what the strategic plan is. I'm really sorry about that. And I'm not blaming Mike. But it wasn't to the exclusion of the planning board or to place burdens on the planning board. The problem we have as a strategic plan committee is we didn't feel capable or qualified to determine what the town wants in the future. And yes, we look to the planning board because under the statute, you do own and are responsible for the master plan of the community. And an implementation committee certainly can't do that because what would they have for authority or ability? And so that's why we're not saying the planning board alone was going to do this, but my God, we wouldn't do it without the planning board as a central focus of this. And I think that's what we were trying to convey, because I've seen personally how defensive the planning board gets when you step in their domain. And as a member of the strategic plan committee and our fellow members in the room, we didn't want to do that. We didn't want to step on anybody's toes. But my God, the big problem we have, and we saw it in the strategic plan committee, and you see it every week when you meet, is nobody has a consensus of where this town wants to be in the future. And therefore, we can't know where we're going because there is no consensus. We've got the select board out there doing studies on whether we should tie to the MWRA sewer. And that's costing real money. But we don't know if the community wants that. Because what's that going to mean? That's going to mean growth. And is that going to mean commercial growth, residential growth, combination of all those? Of course it is. That's the problem we have. And you're not at fault. Nobody's blaming you. But my God, we can't do it without the planning board. And then what I saw in the 2020 master plan was an update of the 2010 master plan. There was no original thinking in there in terms of a direction for this community. It was, oh, it's time to revise what we did 10 years ago. Well, I'm sad to say, and the reality is, and forgive me for my passion, the world is a lot different now than it was in 2010. And quite frankly, it's a lot different than it was pre-pandemic. And we've got to figure out where this community wants to go. And quite frankly, I can be objective on this because I'm not going to be here in 10 more years. And many of us won't be. But that doesn't mean we're not concerned by it and don't see the importance to the community. But we've got to fundamentally see where we are. We saw it with the MBTA zoning. What we did is we did a paper compliance, right? We're going to zone areas that we don't think will be built. So we can meet, let's call it what it is, folks. We're not the only community that did that. Because we got the sense that the only people who show up in this room are people who are against something. And therefore, we don't know what we want to be. We saw the same anxiety with ADUs. What do we do in the ADU situation? What's that going to mean for our school enrollment? What's it going to mean? And then we know, and you saw it at the town meeting. My heart broke for you, Chris. You did what was meant to be a directive from the Attorney General's office on to clarify the terms of our bylaw to avoid litigation, and you basically walked out there empty-handed. That should be telling, folks. It is telling. And yes, I know there's hot buttons in there that was rolled into it, like definition of family and so forth. But at the end of the day, the big picture was lost. Look, we can't do school considerations formally in our decisions. And so when it comes down to the strategic plan, I'm just concerned that much like the master plan and the open space plan, the affordable housing plan, everything else, it's going to be relegated to a table or a bookshelf.
Okay, so how do
And
we
that's what
start?
so this is how we got to
If we all
start.
want to roll up our sleeves and work
Right.
together,
This is
where
what
do
we've
we
got to
start?
do. We've got to start. We've got to have a dialogue. we can't do it now, obviously, till the fall, and this is where the strategic plan felt they had to finish up, and they wanted specific implementation items. And I had a staff meeting with all the department heads, and we assigned every single item in there for work. But what I can't do, what the staff and the department heads can't do, is we can't provide the direction of where this community wants to go. You can call it strategic plan, comprehensive plan, master plan, whatever term you want to do. But we've got to have that discussion, because we're also going to come to this community and we're going to want to build a new middle school. Well, we have enrollment projections, and we've told the MSBA this is what we think is going to be the community, but we don't know what the community wants. So I guess the question is, I don't. If it was easy, we'd have done it by now. But this is the struggle that we had as a strategic plan committee. Is what and Evan was the big voice on this. I'm not trying to push Evan in front of the microphone, but Evan was a big voice saying we don't feel that there's a community consensus on what the community wants to be. Yes, we want to preserve the character, and yes, we want to hold what's dear to the town of Chelmsford. But what is it? Yeah, and we're now 37,000 people by the most recent census data, and we know what the state is doing to us. They're pushing housing, and they're not through yet. Right? It didn't end with MBTA zoning, and it didn't end with ADU zoning. The message is still there. The housing is the big issue, and the question becomes, what do we as a community want to be in terms of a type of community? And I agree, and I've said this. If people of Chelmsford wanted to be Arlington, they would have bought a home in Arlington. And if they wanted to have been Dunstable, they would have bought a home in Dunstable. And instead, we've got the state doing one size fits all. But more importantly, recognizing these constraints, which I know you do, we've got to come to a consensus of what should we be investing in terms of water, sewer, roadways, the traffic, the construction, and ultimately the zoning, because the zoning is the underpinning of all of that. So that is what we need to have a dialogue on, is what do we do coordinated manner, meaning the select board, the planning board, the Board of Health, the Conservation Commission. But clearly the strategic plan, couldn't do it, and it was too big of a lift. And I don't know if there's anything else, Badri or
Paul, can I just
add to this,
talk a couple things? I agree with most of what you're saying. I want to make sure that we're clear that the approach we took for the ADUs and the MBTA was not because we don't want growth, but because we don't want growth in the way that the state was asking us to do it. We wanted to be able to control that the way we want as a town. And so that's why we took the approach we did, and we had discussions about that, and we got some ideas from that we have on our list of things that we want to get done, but we didn't want to do it the way the state was requiring us. So that's why we took that approach, not that we don't want growth. I'm also a little disappointed because my understanding of the purpose of the strategic planning committee was to take all of the different strategic plans from the different groups, like our master plan, Concom's plan, bring them all together and figure out what the community wants based on all of that. That's why it caught me off guard when I'm seeing all of these values and the direction that I think is a good direction from that strategic plan, but then it's asking the board to come up with another plan. It didn't ask the board to update our master plan. It said, come up with this new managing growth plan. And so coming out of the blue like that, I had no idea what the expectation was. And so that's why it caught me off guard in trying to figure out how we're going to go about this.
And the reason for the managed growth thing is we didn't call for an update to the master plan because we felt it was this sole item of growth it was the issue that had to be addressed. So we didn't call for a comprehensive update to the master plan. It's this growth question that is key, is what does the town want to be? And therefore, because if you don't know what you want to be, then you can't plan on how to get there.
I mean, it's a difficult question because there's not a lot of there's a lot of different opinions and strong opinions.
I do want to ask one thing. When we talk about growth, are we essentially talking about growth and revenue for the town?
No.
Then what are we talking about?
We are talking about the fact is that the town will grow. Okay? There's no doubt. And again, take whatever your snapshot in time, right? You could have had a discussion in 1950, it was 10,000 people. You could have had a discussion in 1974 after they built the new high school. What did the town want to go? And I'm sure that there'd be the same perception at that time. Where is it that they wanted to go? Here we are now in 2025. It's not about revenue growth, but yes, the growth of the town will generate revenue, but that's a determination of whether that revenue would offset the cost. And depending upon the development, it may or may not. But in a town that's mostly built out, that really isn't the driver on this, wasn't the revenue issue. The question became, given that growth is inevitable, and with the specter that it's housing, not only in Massachusetts, but across the nation, that the question became, so if there's going to be housing growth in particular, because that's where the sense is, then the question is, how do we deal with that? And if the answer is we don't want it, then we should not be pursuing outside sewer sources, such as the MWRA or expansion of the city of Lowell or other efforts. Because if the answer is we don't want that, then we shouldn't be going down there. But that's what we're doing because there is no consensus, and every board is sort of knowingly on their own, going in their own direction as to what they think is a potential solution. And so it's not revenue growth. It's the fact that growth is inevitable, and what we've seen for growth, let's look at the growth in the last 8 years has all been essentially been multifamily housing, right? Mm-hmm. You know they're going to open these units on 255 Princeton Street, right? 400 units. You saw what happened to Kinloch, 9 Acton Road, Grist Mill 1. And
people don't like it. And
people don't like it, exactly. And I'm sure that in the 1960s they didn't like the farms either, or Williamsburg. But I'm not sure what the right answer is. But we can only deal with where we are today and going forward. And the question is, what does the town want? Because if they don't want the growth, then let's just stop these explorations.
You just said growth is inevitable. So,
right, but no,
so
why am I out pursuing MWA connections in Bedford and Burlington if the town doesn't want growth?
But Paul,
and I'm going to get the answers, and believe me, we'll have the report in July, and it'll say this many millions of dollars, this much for operating costs, and then the question's going to become, well, then what do we do with it?
I also see
because I don't want to hook up for a massive cost that then drives more massive development. You know what I mean? Like, if you build the infrastructure, are people going to come here?
Right, but yet on the other hand, we're so fixated on housing that we're losing sight of the good jobs and what we want to provide as a community. I'm not faulting the town of Chelmsford. You're seeing the state do this. The state developed the Devon's Enterprise Zone after the Army base closed for economic development, right? They limited it to like 500 housing units, whatever the number was. And now with today's pressures, they're basically throwing that out the window and saying, we got to put housing there. But the question's going to become, well, where are you going to put economic development if you've now utilized your prime areas for housing? And that's, the consensus you're having here tonight with Lockheed Martin in a residential neighborhood, you know darn well it's going to come back at us with Kinloch, the residents of Kinloch, with the development behind them and everything else. And so that's my point is we've got to knowingly decide where we want to go as a community. And it's not a criticism of the planning board. It's the fact that we don't think, meaning the strategic plan committee didn't think that we could do it without the planning board being the central point of this, because of the heritage that the planning board has in terms of master plan development, in terms of the zoning control in the community, and that's really what we need to do.
But I also think that there's a big difference between growth
Yep.
and advancement.
Yeah.
And I think we can advance as a community without growing, but given our limitations in infrastructure, we can't even advance. So because we don't have the sewer capacity, we can't fill up some of those office buildings with some of the R&D that we would love to get in there. But that's not necessarily growth. That's
But it will be
advancement
because
progress.
let me give you an example. If we come in and provide additional sewer capacity on 129, right? Because that's the closest, think about it, the closest geographic border and how you would run sewer to MWRA would be down Gorham Street to Bedford and Burlington. I've seen the draft report. I don't have the final report. I don't have a hard copy of it, but I've talked to the consultants, and they're going to come back in July in probably less than 2 months, and they'll have some numbers and reports. But that's where you go. The problem is, the question is, okay, so now we provide sewer capacity in 129. That, as you know, your residential development's allowed in 129 as well. So, and as we know, money gravitates to the biggest return. So if there's sewer capacity on 129, as much as you saw 270 get torn down for a warehouse, somebody's going to tear anything down to build a multifamily because you're going to have the sewer capacity to do it. And so the problem is how do we deal with this? Because that kind of growth is going to create stresses, right? Because if you put 400 units in, especially if the state's pushing family housing, so 3-bedroom units and so forth as minimums, you're going to then impact the school system. You're then going to impact the traffic and the congestion, everything in the community. So that's what we're trying to get a handle on is, it's sort of the unintended consequences, because you can't just simply add, well, we're going to add sewer in 129 without realizing that that's not going to be constrained to, for enterprise. It's going to be available for all types of development. And the bottom line is, like anything else, the money's going to go to the highest return. And right now, the highest return is residential, multifamily residential.
Don't we currently today have problems with our infrastructure? Isn't the sewer system today limited by our current population and everything else? Isn't there problems today with it?
No, the sewer system is limited by the treatment capacity at the Lowell Regional Wastewater Plant, which is not regional. It's owned by the city of Lowell, and we have a license to send our sewer effluent to that plant.
A certain amount.
Right.
an
We don't.
allotment.
But we don't have any internal capacity constraints that prohibits us from developing.
But
in any area
our
of town.
growth is limited by the current sewer allotment that our town has today.
Correct. Yes,
Without
that's
even
correct.
growing anywhere, that is a
That's
current
correct.
problem.
Right.
Just
So
why
we
he's
know that has to
investigating the
change, right?
NWRA.
So we know that has to change, and that's part of growth that has to continue, right?
But yet when they tried introduction of private sewer systems, the Board of Health reared up and said, we don't want private sewer systems. So if somebody wanted to
In Zone 2,
in Zone 2,
which is most
which
of
is
the town.
most of the town, which is
which
most
is our
of the
drinking
town.
water.
Right.
So so that's the problem. Is so you're kind of in the horns of a dilemma. You're limited by sewer, but yet there's other options. We are one of the few communities that's entirely sewered. But yet when the idea of introducing some limited septic into the sewer, that got pushed back. So
But I don't think we disagree with that. I don't think the sewer thing is something that here we disagree. We all know that that's a problem.
Right.
I mean, there's specific questions in here. I know, Chris, you've been trying to get answers to, but.
But I think, Paul, my perspective is, I'm not saying that the planning board doesn't have a key role in this. I just don't think that we have a lead role in this. I think it really, because of all of the intertwined issues, sewer, school, those are two of the issues, but we also have an issue with conservation, with a number of other areas, Board of Health. I think because of all of those intertwined issues, the lead on this managing growth strategy needs to be at a higher level. I think it needs to be at the select board, it needs to be at the strategic implementation committee, something like that.
But the
that brings all
implementation
of these
committee
groups
isn't a
together.
higher level
Yeah,
than the
I mean,
planning
it's
board.
Well, yeah, because previous job that I had, I was a business unit owner, and I didn't go around setting my own goals about how much revenue I was supposed to get and that sort of thing. That was given to me by the executives, by the CEO, president, and so forth and so on. They allocated your business unit, you need to grow by this much, et cetera, et cetera.
Excuse me.
That I feel like is the position we're in. We're not the ones deciding what kind of growth needs to happen overall. We can certainly do things to promote it and manage it and so forth and so on, which we are already doing. But the thing that we don't do is we don't set, like for example, the thing that Evan sent out from Stratford, Canada, right at the beginning. We want to add X many hundred units, right? So MBTA, similar thing, we want this many units. That's the kind of general framework that we need. What we want is we want to increase by X tax base. We want so much commercial or industrial revenue. We want so many units. We want so many whatever, which may be something that comes out of a study, and maybe that would be the thing of our study. I don't know. But those are the kinds of things that we need in order to execute, as opposed to actually come up with them. That's an executive decision. That's above us.
But
My
with all
opinion.
due respect, Joel, the legislation, the governor gave the town a housing count under MBTA zoning, right? So you did have a number. And the
Well,
town
that was their
basically-
number
and the-
for us. But
Right,
that's not
so-
the best number for us, according to our leadership, which is you and the select board, right?
So
I'm just saying in the world that I come from, which is a world in which there were expectations about what was going to happen.
yeah.
That those things were not set by me. Those were things that were given to me, and then I was implementing them. I was executing them.
So as both of you clear up, and I of the committee, which has still not been dissolved, as it's still is it dissolved? Okay, good. Okay, good. I'm done with it. As chair, one of the discussion points we did, and some of the history was raised, and I want to lay some background on this before stepping into this. As Evan pointed out in his email, I think to several of you, I think at least, or all of them, is that the background is, come January, we had not, to a degree, addressed this notion of what are some of the challenges and how we're going to solve this integrated problem. I was one of the mindset for a brief amount of time after Evan did produce, thinking that the committee would solve. And by the way, for clarification, it was the Strategic Planning Steering Committee, not the committee itself. Our job was to steer the plan, the broad framework. So we were not involved in the actual solution phase. We were in the problem definition, identification, goal-setting process to you in that sense. I think during the discussion specifically, as it got laid out very much so, and all the angst around not being communicated, all accepted, this is probably a first time that we're doing this, and we should have communicated broader, and lots of leaks happen, so to speak, or broken links. But I think one of the critical things to understand is the planning board. I'm not saying the other boards don't have the role, and I would be on the roadways probably accosted for it, but you have a diligent process. You have a master plan that has a sense and notion, whether it has an update or where things stand, wherever it is. It also means that we are almost close to the next give or take another 5 years, so to speak. We're also at a crucial juncture. And as a committee on the sustainability that I have sometimes come and spoken to all of you in and around, I take the very, very long view. A strategic plan is technically intended to be 5 years, 10 years at best. But some of the work that we are going to lay out in this, who do we want to be? How do we grow? Is not a question for 5 to 10 years. You can't run that. You really look very, very long distance in this. And I think the planning board usually has that thought process to a degree, right? If not all of it, at least what I observed, right? So I'm just stating that as a basis in some ways. The other thing I think was, as pointed by the chair, is that, it's not that the planning board should be the lead or not. It was given off to the planning board as being an anchor. Whether you want to be your lead at that point or not, that's something that you can discuss, so to speak. But the fact is, you're intimately aware generally of the challenges of what the master plan document is, some of the challenges in implementation, the types of questions you ask. Even when reviewing applications, you take multidimensional questions into account. All of the 7 points that you talked about, I think, was presented about the different aspects. The planning board takes into consideration in one form or the other in terms of asking questions. It may not be the straight question by question, but you guys do that as a committee, as a board. So I think take this as a request that we thought the most intellectual, most process-oriented group that has the ability to collect. And one of the things I think also all of it affected, maybe subtly affected us, is the fact that the last master plan probably had about 1,000+ responses, or give or take some number.
1,200, I think.
1,200 responses, and our process only yielded about 300, so to speak, in certain other areas also. So it elicited a few things, right? So think of this as a call, is anchor it, if not lead it, but you have the ability to call for the types of people or put out and have a discussion around the types of people who need to be in there, first order. And as a conversation with Select Board Member Aaron and Town Manager, and see where that leads in terms of the type of makeup and what kind of processes might we use. And this might be an opportunity, this is my personal opinion now, is that this might be an opportunity to reuse the 2020 master plan and see if there is a different type of thinking that we have to bring, not just in 10 years, but this may be a momentous occasion for us, because we are entering into a phase, in personal opinion, a period where Massachusetts has to transform all the laws or the guidance of the states that are being put together is basically trying to drive an economic engine that is needing to happen. And people and bases and housing is the first order economic engine. Where there is housing, where there are people and smart people and capable people and affordable or reasonably affordable or somewhat affordable, whatever that terminology is, where there are people, there's going to be jobs or economic engines happening, and they wanted to look at that as an option, right? At least that's my very simplistic top-down goal. But Joel, a pun intended, sometimes when you are the best team member in the CEO's staff, they do call upon you to set the goals for the rest of the business unit. So in some ways, that also happens.
Well, I must not have been, because they didn't ask me.
But irrespective, so to speak.
How is what you're proposing different than the master plan?
It's not necessarily just the master plan, but we'll all have the ability, in my personal opinion, is to have the integration of the other committee, other input points, and have the discussion and debate, which may be about where do we want to head as a community process, to have people say, what is it that we want to, and drive conversations around scenario planning, right? If you do scenario A, whatever the scenario B, this is the number of people, this is the type of things we will have as facilities or capabilities to serve, and because that's additional committee members from different town departments or boards or committees will show up, and we'll have a robust discussion about creating scenarios to present to the community.
So, I mean, it sounds like a larger version than essentially what we did for MBTA, where we were looking at different scenarios of how we might implement it, but we had assistance from NIMCOG, who was really guiding and helping us. So one question I have is, I mean, I would think that if we were going to do something like that, then we would need some sort of assistance. And so I don't know if NIMCOG is the right group to provide that kind of assistance.
They're the ones that did the last plan.
Or whether we did
We would obtain consultant assistance.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But this goes back to my point that I made earlier. I was under the impression that that's what that strategic planning group was supposed to be doing, is pulling all of these plans together and coming up with that more comprehensive strategic plan for growth and development in the town.
It didn't happen.
It feels like it started, and there was some progress at the beginning of that document, but then it got hard, so everyone stopped.
Okay, let me try and address that, whether it was hard or not. But I think as any new effort goes around, because this being the first time around that we envisioned the strategic plan, and as a steering committee, our task was to figure out what the big goals and buckets of issues were and how to look for it, and just have an integrated accepted set of goals, right? We looked at high-performance government, we looked at quality of life, infrastructure, and this big piece around managing growth. So we have 4 or 5 buckets that we wanted to look at and have specific goals. We started to go down a particular path. Some people had, questions. Maybe it didn't come out through the various Q&A process that we had the consultant with. And Evan did catch on to it and said, hey, listen, are we addressing this very critical question? Central question, right? Where are we headed? This is a point because COID was passed around 2012, 14, 15, something around that, if I'm not mistaken. And he's brought this question, have you thought about this? This is a question not just of the growth and development utilization and tax revenue base, but just having that thought process. It's a complex question. And Mike and I were on sideline just having a chat saying, do we do something like that? We ideated and decided from inputs from the rest of the committee members that it would take a lot more time and process, that the then committee members needed more experienced hands like the planning board.
Mm-hmm.
So it was an ode to the planning board's historical role, processes, thought process that all of you have evolved into, not in some way as to where it was. That's where it particularly landed in. So, Chris, you're right that if it could have been, it would have been that committee if it had that one answer set. But we ended up being a steering committee to set the goal process for the first time around. And I think by that goal process, a lot of people got more aware and educated about all the complexity of the issues. They stepped back for that moment. So I think in the spirit of dialogue and thinking forward, digest what it is, whether the word is lead or anchor or something else, participant, maybe the select board reappoints another study committee or you want to lead that or inputs. It maybe it's a conversation to say who are the pertinent stakeholders and participants who can vision this out for, as Paul pointed out, it's not just 10 years. And who knows, even 10 years later, I may not be living here, or you all have won the tri-state lottery and decided to move elsewhere, right? Hawaii or, who knows. But the point is, can we give a path? And that's a public input process again. It's the vigorous debate.
I think we were just surprised, really.
Possibly surprised, and that's why I accepted, right? The strategic plan was released, or it was published, but it wasn't presented in every corner of it. But I think Paul did a 2-minuter at the town meeting in the spring, but that was probably not quick enough for everybody's catch. So surprise given, obviously, next time around, as I was saying at the end of the strategic committee, steering committee meeting, hopefully some of us in that committee are around for the next revision in 5 years, give or take, to know, because the process needs
to figure out that central question.
I think, can I also ask who the consultant was that worked on this?
Yeah, right.
Barry Dunn.
Yeah, Barry Dunn.
Aaron, do you want to jump in? Otherwise,
Evan, or you seem like.
I just want to jump in while Aaron's coming to the microphone. That I think that the first thing needs to be established is what are the demand signals, right? So in this case, Paul's already identified. It didn't seem quite logical to me, but nonetheless, he has identified that there's going to be inevitable growth. So the thing you'd want to do is you'd want to get estimates as to what you think that growth is going to be, so that you can then see and in what way, in terms of if it's residential housing growth or what have you, so that you can at least identify what is it that's going to, or potential costs associated with infrastructure, so that you can then identify what is it that you think you need to build up in terms of either infrastructure or your base, in terms of what kinds of businesses you're trying to attract or that sort of thing. So I think that, we really need to understand, first and foremost, I think, what is driving this. And then the second thing that Aaron mentioned was he was concerned about maintaining at least some degree of growth so that we could maintain level service. And so that's another one. So, okay, you can project out. We have projections on what that's going to be. So that also forms a basis for what kinds of revenue do you think we're going to need to be generating in order for that, to then see how and what we do is going to be generating that kind of revenue. So that's at least in my mind, one of the first things, we need to identify is what is the need before we go about figuring out how we might meet that need and how we're going to get consensus around meeting that need. But go ahead.
All right, I don't want to take away from the important messages and context that Paul and Badri have articulated tonight, because I think some of that discussion and the important comments that came out of that were what the intention that Chris and I had in some brief comments after town meeting when the plan was put out there publicly. That meeting didn't come together, and then it showed up as an agenda item on your 14th. I think I have that right, the 14th meeting. So I attended that meeting, not just as a liaison, but also with the expectation that if there were questions, as a member of the committee and the select board, I could try to fill in some of those blanks. And quite candidly, right, wrong, or indifferent, whether you intended it or not, it didn't feel like the planning board was super excited, and I didn't get an opportunity to try to clarify. I certainly couldn't have done it as eloquently as these guys did tonight, but I could have at least started some of the conversation. And again, if I took anybody out of context, people can go back and watch the meetings, and I encourage you to not take my context, view it as your own. But I went back to just make sure I heard it right, and the statement was made that the planning board and zoning is not designed to encourage growth and expansion, but designed to limit, control, and set minimum standards. And yeah, that's in a lot of the rules, but to me, I walked out of here, no opportunity to comment. Didn't seem like there was any interest beyond what were made for discussion points amongst yourselves. And then that statement that kind of goes against this idea that I've had for a long time, that we have to manage the growth, because I don't want to become, I've said this 100 times, my hometown. I don't even recognize it anymore. So if we manage that, we manage it to get what we want, and we can still have growth, the appropriate growth, advancement. I think that's a better word. So I don't like using growth, I like using redevelopment, and I think I'm going to steal the advancement, Chris. So, so that
Steal
being
away.
said, I want to be very clear with the board. And I want to be very clear with the public and make sure that they're public statements. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the board, the work that the board does, and openly admit it's the one job I couldn't do in this town. Everybody shows up prepared, educated, and they learn about all kinds of things that I still can't figure out, and I've said in a number of these meetings. So my intention was to not, Joel, make anybody look bad, insult anybody. You'll find over the next 3 years that sometimes my passions get ahead of the words in the statement. But what's underlying, is it's because I just care, and I want this done right. And the inability to have a conversation when it was an agenda item. Now, I didn't know if I was supposed to come up and ask, but I thought if you had it on the agenda, you were going to ask me to get up and speak, so I didn't want to jump up and derail the conversation and have you say not an appropriate time. So if I personally insulted the board, I publicly take responsibility for that. That wasn't my intention. And the conversation is the important part. The strategic plan, guys, isn't perfect, but we need to start somewhere. And I do hear a lot of, it's very frustrating. We're not designed to encourage growth and expansion. And I just don't believe that to be true. Again, I think what we're doing too is we're getting noodled around, we're getting worked up around some of the different definitions of what does growth really mean. Again, if we sit down and have the dialogue and the discussion, maybe we can get the right definition around it, because I'm going to bet that most of us in this room are not misaligned whatsoever. But here we are at this discussion tonight, and I'm not going to lie, it's definitely, if I could rewind the tape and put some of my statements back in the box and keep them to myself, I would. But I wouldn't I wouldn't take back, and I won't take back, the passion that I care about this stuff. Because I don't want it to be Stoneham or Reading or Wakefield. But I also want us to be a place that we do attract business, we do attract the right growth, we do have the right type of housing for everybody that we need across the spectrum. From the new people starting out that can't afford a whole lot, to the seniors that want to age in place. I care about all of those people. And this board has a lot of that expertise and a lot of that experience. So the idea that we had was that you would be the kind of the lead agency and get the right people together. And that just, we didn't get to have that conversation, and said, again, you said some things that definitely didn't seem as friendly at the time, and if I took that out of context, again, my apologies. But this stuff is too important, candidly, to let the meeting on the 14th and the meeting on the 19th derail this. So I am still all in on this project, but on the other hand, I do recognize that it's being the liaison to this board is beyond just this particular project. And I serve on all my liaison assignments at the pleasure of the chair. I am more than willing to go back to the chair and say that we need the liaison to be able to move forward, and we need this project to be able to move forward. Then we can talk at our next meeting about updating those liaison assignments. And again, it's not personal, I get that, but I do, that liaison assignment needs to work going forward. And very much how this gets resolved, whether the planning board takes the lead or not, or the select board takes the lead, and it's a couple of different people to put this together to get these discussions happening. As I've said to Evan and others in the past, we need to start doing something, because MWRA is going to take years, and we want to know the impacts. But as Paul said, if the town really doesn't want that, then let's not spend the money and figure out what we're going to do. But it would be foolish to not consider the financial impacts of not having some sort of redevelopment and some sort of business growth. Would be foolish, right? So if we know that that's not what we want to do, then let's take some appropriate action to go down the path and address how that's going to impact us. I also definitely don't want to be Burlington or Reading or Stoneham, any of those either. So again, my
Thank you.
apologies, and please let Aaron or myself know. And if we need to do the liaison assignments, I'm perfectly fine with having that updated.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate that. I do want to mention that, yes, part of that debacle last meeting was my fault. I did want to mention some of the concerns and issues to the rest of the board. Evan was not at the meeting. We hadn't had that discussion yet that I wanted us to have around getting a better understanding. So I didn't want to have an internal discussion with the board, even with you providing input, because we didn't have a complete picture. So I didn't want to have that discussion at that meeting. But I did want to give the rest of the board some insight into what I was hoping to get clarity on. And I didn't want to get too deep into the weeds at that meeting because I still wasn't prepared to have that discussion. I have said it in the past, and I still stand by it, that zoning does not encourage growth and development. It sets the minimum standards. We've seen it multiple times. The underlying zoning essentially sets what things we do and don't want. Doesn't mean it's going to get built. The overlays can set additional things of what we want. But again, on 129, we have grand visions in that overlay of what we've wanted to see there. That hasn't encouraged anything. And so I have done a ton of reading on this, ton of research, and I've seen it in practice in this town where the zoning does not encourage growth and development. It can help it. It can remove the barriers. And I think it's one of the pieces of the full picture around town that can encourage growth and development. But I think the role of zoning is more around setting the guardrails, setting the minimum standards, but there needs to be a lot more in order to be able to encourage that growth. And so that is my perspective on zoning. And I'll stand by it because we've tried many overlays in town that haven't encouraged the growth that we've wanted it to encourage. So that's my perspective on zoning. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I'm pushing back a lot on the planning board owning this, because if we do want to encourage advancement, which to me is a better way of saying it than managing growth, but then I think it really needs to be at a different level. Like I've said before, the planning board can participate, other groups can participate, but I think it really does need to be maybe a select board driven task force, which is what the strategic planning group was. So
I'm going to respectfully semi-disagree. And
Okay.
and the reason is because I think that either I'm being flattered too much by what Baudry said, or
you are.
Either what?
being flattered too much by what Baudry said. But I think given the fact that this board was able to execute the MBTA, says to me that this board is able to take on responsibilities that can be fairly comprehensive and wide-ranging and drive to a solution within a reasonable period of time. I don't know that I see the select board as being the same way.
Yeah.
So I see that this board, and because of our history with the master plan, which really covers the same kind of spectrum of things that are mentioned in the strategic plan. So I agree with Baudry on that too. So I think we are, of the different groups in the town, I think we probably are the best choice to do this because we've already been doing it in a more limited way.
I want to hear what Evan has to say, but I also want to add on to that first, that I also think that our work with MBTA started us with a lot of thoughts about this process, which would feed into this process. I mean, I have a few ideas of things
So-
that I feel strongly about that I would like, that I think would be helpful in terms of a long range, whatever you want to say, advancement process. And I think that I agree with Evan that I agree with Joel that I think that we would be better suited to do it.
So
But Evan has been trying.
I know, Evan, I'll get to you in a minute. I think I agree with you that we were successful in the MBTA and the ADU. But I think a lot of the success from the MBTA came from the NEMCOG group. They helped guide us.
Oh, absolutely.
And we'll need guidance.
Big key to the success was the consultant used in the process.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But we could use NEMCOG.
I also think that process took over our board.
Yeah.
And if we have any hope of ever advancing some of the work that this board needs to do, that we keep trying to get to, that the state keeps overriding, I think we have to make a choice. If we're going to do this, it's going to take up all of our time, and we're not going to be able to get to all of the other stuff that we've
I
talked
think
about.
this doesn't have as much meaning until you answer that central question.
Yeah.
I agree, and I think we have progress that we can make in the meantime. We've been making progress without this already.
But I think we should try and tackle this question.
Yeah. If I may, because I've been keeping my mouth shut.
You and then I promised Evan.
Okay. I rather agree with Joel and with Deirdre. Our function in the town, I mean, the fact that the word planning is in the name of this board should give us a couple of hints as to what the appropriate organization might be to tackle this question. But let's be really honest about the question that we're tackling here. It's a very, very difficult question. It was punted by the Master Plan Committee in 2010. They didn't want to deal with it, and although there were a couple of us on the Strategic Planning Committee that thought that maybe it might be a good idea for the Strategic Planning Committee to take a shot. Hi there. We know who we are. That didn't happen either for a number of reasons and legitimate ones in terms of manpower and timing. So far in the last 20 years, everybody that's tried to deal with this problem has wound up punting it. All right, why is that? Well, we talk about diversity of opinion in town. You know, some people want no growth, some people want lots of growth. That's not really the problem. The problem is that we have people, individuals, who say, I want growth, but I don't want it here, and I don't want it there, and I don't want it there. And you've got an awful lot of people who are saying, who are taking two positions that are diametrically opposed. I mean, you can't have usable growth if you allow every objection that comes up on a neighborhood basis to block you. And we have zoning districts in town that were laid out, some of them 50, 60 years ago, that said 128 is a great place to do this kind of industrial stuff, but yet nobody wants it when it actually shows up. So it's a very, very, very difficult problem to handle. I think we can do it, but it's not going to be the fun kind of thing where everybody gets into wonderful agreement. A lot of people are going to come in on both sides of the issue. Individuals, the same individual on both sides of the issue, including me. You know, I have feelings about what would be good and what wouldn't, and I'm not sure that they're all always consistent. So I think we should take on the problem. I don't think we should kid ourselves that it's the least bit easy to handle. And we should probably not spend a lot of time doing yet another canvassing of the populace to find out what the populace thinks. We probably ought to come up with a plan and then deal with
Promulgate
the
it.
reactions to that plan and make the modifications at that stage. All right, did I make any sense at all?
Yes.
Okay.
Evan?
Just a couple of items. One is, I don't think anyone ever thought that the planning board, as a full committee, would lead the effort. I think that needs to be really clear. I think the vision was a task force would be created, 1 or 2 members of the planning board, 1 or 2 from select board, similar to master planning. The reason I'm mentioning that is that if it's a task force, then the actual full planning board in your regular meetings are not being devoted to this effort. And I think that's, you know, that speaks directly to workload and things of that nature. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time on the why. You know, as Mike mentioned, the last 20 years of master planning in town was that. It was just planning. It was visioning. The difference in my mind is that we are now faced with real infrastructure challenges, and these are beyond challenges. Sooner than later, if the town does nothing, there will be a letter written by a town official saying we cannot provide the connection. So the context of the 2010 master plan and the 2020 master plan, yeah, no one wanted to touch it, but there was really no critical need to answer the question because there wasn't any threat other than a self-created political threat.
Yeah.
But sitting here today, we are closer than not to receiving a letter and having to tell a property owner or an investor, we cannot accommodate you. So I think that's a major reason as to why. Other reasons as to why, Paul and I and other town officials meet with a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people who want to invest tens of millions of dollars into the town. And 10 plus years ago, staff was able to clearly articulate the strategy, the vision. Increasingly, we're not able to do that. So, as an open-ended question, I would pose is, what is the town's aspirations, short, intermediate, and long term?
Yeah.
And you can answer that in a variety of ways. You want to retain character. You want to advance. You want to be transformational. But essentially, the last 20 years have been trends continued. The master plan didn't make any major changes. We did a couple overlays. Physically, the town hasn't changed much. You've had 10 or 12 40Bs that look like mushrooms in the middle of neighborhoods and corridors. But if you don't want trends continued, then it's something else. What is that something else? You can call it opportunity, growth, advancement, enhancement. The fact of the matter is, you've reached the point where you're a mature, built-out suburban community. Your physical development is what it is. You're going to be primarily dealing with redevelopment. But even if you had all the proper zoning in place that provided for appropriate development in appropriate locations, you're still closer to a scenario where you're not going to be able to effectuate that, even if you wanted to, because you don't have the proper infrastructure. And even if you do have the proper infrastructure, the residents and the sentiment of the community is that the infrastructure isn't adequate. So you're dealing with a variety of issues. Another reason it's for why, when you layer on all of these real and perceived challenges related to development and what the planning board does from a regulatory perspective, and then the other regulatory interests that have quickly been added to the table, all of that, in my opinion, challenges the economic relevancy of the community. Regardless of whether you want to do nothing or you want to be aggressive, eventually the economic relevancy is going to be an item that the town's going to have to deal with. Joel refers to it as, approving development to chase revenue. You can call it whatever you want to call it, but eventually, if the town is not advancing, reinventing itself, reinvesting, there's going to be a day of reckoning. And then finally, we can be reactive or proactive. I would say currently we're very reactive. I think the board may have convinced itself that you're being proactive by trying to put the proper zoning in place to obtain the appropriate development. That's a good exercise, but it's really just nibbling at the edges, because even if you're successful in getting all of the zoning changed to be appropriate locations and appropriate development, you still have the neighborhood, the sentiment, you still have the conflicts, you still have change. Anytime a developer comes to you, they're going to want more than what's there. Not more square footage, but you may be taking a building that's been very lightly utilized, and now they're going to reactivate it. So you're going to still have all the same challenges. The real challenges that need to be dealt with are the infrastructure challenges, the real challenges, the ones that town officials in the community can truly document and provide evidence as to why there's strains on the municipal infrastructure. The other stuff is political, for lack of a better word. So to me, you layer all of those reasons, that's the compelling public interest as to why we need to do something different. And it's not a master plan. The master plan has not solved any problems. It's never going to solve any problems. So I view the managed growth strategy as it's the next logical step of a master plan. But these issues need to be discussed. And at the end of the day, as Aaron said, and Badre said, and Paul said, if the choice of the community is not to pursue economic expansion via MWRA connection, you're still going to have 8 million square feet of commercial industrial that we need to figure out how is the town, what's the town's expectation for that 8 million square feet? Is it good jobs? Is it increased CIP tax base? Is it transitioning some of that space to something else? But you can't do any of that. You can't even have an intelligent, rational conversation if the infrastructure doesn't support the vision or the goals. And so to me, that's kind of where we are, you know, in the public realm with public hearings and so forth. The record would indicate that it's political reasons not to support development. In reality, if you were to neutralize public sentiment, you're still left with significant challenges. So we can call it whatever we want to call it, but we need to figure out to what extent does the town want to provide the opportunity for growth, advancement, enhancement via infrastructure investments. That's really, you know, the entirety in a nutshell.
I don't think anyone's disagreeing with anything.
No,
of what
I
you
agree.
said.
I thought it was important to explain why, because I think there's a lot of people outside this room
Yeah.
who don't necessarily understand the complexities as to how we got to where we are. And again, it's not just infrastructure. We have a variety of sentiment against development or significant concerns about development. We've recently layered on environmental concerns. So even if you have unlimited infrastructure, you still have challenges to get the kind of development you want to get. Even if the proper zoning is in place, as you said, Chris, if the market doesn't believe that it is a good place to spend its money compared to other places, it's going to choose the other places. So the managed growth strategy isn't just, you know, infrastructure. It really needs to also get to the core of you know, public sentiment. What are the compelling public interests? What are the aspirations? What are our strategic goals and objectives? If you just look at the 6 million square feet on 129, what's the town expect that to provide to the town 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 25 years from now? And those are discussions that aren't necessarily directly related to, you know, MWRA connection or not, but they are directly related to each and every time a development project meets with Paul and I or staff and eventually the neighborhood or the planning board. None of these projects are easy. None of them are ever going to be perfect. If you had MWRA unlimited capacity and a 200,000 square foot biotech manufacturing facility made a proposal, some neighborhood is going to feel negatively impacted. So the growth management strategy, if successful, would clearly articulate guiding principles and core values with the understanding that development today, there's winners and losers, and under a perfect scenario, there's still going to be winners and losers. But what is the overriding town-wide compelling public interest as to why we do any of this stuff? Right now, I think it's very combative and divisive, meaning I don't think anyone can clearly articulate where there are winners and where there are losers. There's no strategy.
But Paul, Evan, I do think, though, that a lot of the neighborhood sentiment for the negative neighborhood sentiment for growth and development is related to the lack of infrastructure. It's if we had more capacity in the schools, if we had better roadways, if we had more capacity for sewer and didn't have to go with septic, I really do think there would be less and less opposition from neighborhoods to some of these development projects.
You could be right. And so
But
so that brings-
because of
that brings-
the
that brings me to
negative
Aaron's
impacts.
point.
But I think because of some of the negative impacts on the neighborhoods, because of these infrastructure challenges, that's why we're seeing a lot of the,
No, understood, understood. So to Aaron's point, MWR is a 10-year horizon.
yeah.
So what is the town going to do for the next 5 years? I think what the managed growth strategy is suggesting is that we need an answer now in order to be at the place we want to be 10 years from now. You can't wait any longer.
But that's
Because
a
what-
different
Because
question.
what's happening is the town is digging itself into a theoretical hole, and the marketplace and the community
Yeah.
is running in separate directions. There needs to be a forum to answer these questions and come up with a plan to achieve the desired outcome. That way, everybody is hearing the same message. They may not agree with it, but then internal and external stakeholders understand what the town's strategy is. Ideally, there would be political commitment to that strategy. And then neighborhoods, planning boards, staff, external stakeholders would understand. Right now, there's no even ability to articulate what the town's strategy is. There is no strategy right now.
But what you said earlier about what's our short-term plan? We don't know what the short-term plan is because we don't know what the long-term plan is.
So then you can put all of that in
Chicken egg.
a growth management strategy process to be figured out. But right now, it's like I said, some people would say we're still being reactive. My guess is people on the planning board and myself would say, well, we are being proactive. We're trying to fix the zoning.
I think we're being reactive in many cases and as proactive as we can be without knowing that
Right,
long-term
and what I'm
strategy.
suggesting is a growth management strategy, a forum, proactive forum with a specific strategic intent would be very, very, very beneficial for all involved.
I don't think anyone's disagreeing with that.
Okay,
I think everyone's agreeing that we need that.
yeah, so who leads it? What I'm hearing tonight is the preferences that the planning board leads it. What that means to me is that the planning board is appointing the task force. After that's done, if the right people are appointed to the task force and you have a good consultant on board, the full planning board shouldn't be burdened. Ultimately, the final plan is going to have to come to the full planning board, likely the select board. But I think it's more about providing a credible process that where everybody understands and wants a credible process that's data-driven, that is acknowledging that there's three opportunity scenarios, and that your intent is to figure out to what extent you want or need development and how to pay for those capital improvements to accommodate that desired development, growth, whatever you want to call it.
So if we assume, and we do need to wrap this up soon because we do have other agenda items, but if we assume that the planning board is going to lead this, the next question is, do we have any volunteers from the planning board to lead this?
Maybe premature.
But that's my point, is that we've already just nominated 2 people for another task force. We've got a number of...
Whether you lead or not, there's going to be at least 2 planning board members
Right,
asked
but
asked to participate.
But we've also got a lot of other zoning amendments coming up for fall town meeting. And if the planning board is leading this, it will be more work on those members of the planning board than if they were just participants. It will be.
If they're chair, maybe. But there's ways to mitigate that.
Unless Badri wants to volunteer.
Exactly.
Let me make a comment to what
Could you come up to the mic so others can hear?
I was just going to make a comment. It's not my place to volunteer at this point. I was just going to make the same point that Evan made, is that maybe the appointment, rather than figuring out leading in the sense, is not by saying that they have to chair and run the process. Leading is by saying, providing the weightage, some of the knowledge base of what the planning board has and the processes and other things, maybe the way to think about it, that a task force setting up process gets started, and then, that task force also will have to go through the forming, storming, norming, conforming, performing stage that we just saw in the last hour and a half, so to speak, in some ways play out. So I think having appropriate people who have knowledge of the older master plan, somebody who's interested in looking at it in a 10, 25 horizon plus range is going to be an interest fact, and figuring out a few data points there is going to be a good thing to have the committee or the new task force to come up with the appropriate other members, so to speak.
Okay.
That's all my comment. Thanks.
You want to say something?
No, I think I'm going to keep my mouth shut. Well, no, maybe I won't. I think, however we set this up, I think it's going to be very important to have a detailed conversation of exactly what this group needs to do. And I think one thing we need to look at, and it concerned me a bit in the conversation that you and Evan just had, we shouldn't be looking at infrastructure. I know this sounds like heresy. We should be looking at the objective, what we want it to look like, and then back up from there and look at the issues of infrastructure. And I will say, on the issues of infrastructure, there's an argument technique that you find in legal argument all the time, in legal writing and in litigation. It's called the parade of horribles, where somebody doesn't want something, so they start listing all the most horrible things that they could imagine that would result from this thing that they don't want to happen. We hear it in our context with, for example, claims that it will wildly overload our school system, when in fact every time we've looked at what goes on in additional housing and the kind of housing we'd be looking at, it doesn't really have all that big an impact on schools. A little bit, but it's not gigantic. We get into this with traffic discussions. We get into this with road condition instructions. We're as guilty as anybody else of falling for a parade of horribles. So we should talk, whatever this committee does, it should focus on where we want to go first, and
Yes.
then go figure out
Yeah, obviously.
what infrastructural things might be implicated.
I understand what Mike's saying. I would offer a little bit of a different perspective in that as we study all work on this together on managed growth, what I see when we define managed growth, I think the hardest thing for our board and for everyone that we work with is, what is the acceptable level of growth? In my mind, managed growth means that we're trying to, speaking for myself only, of course, it's not realistic to think we're going to close the shades, lock down the roads, we're going to have zero growth or advancement for the next several years. That's not realistic. I think managed growth to me means we're trying to match this with what we have available for infrastructure. Maybe the roads aren't perfect, but one thing I do know is the school system. So right now, there's an effort to build a new Parker Middle School. And what we've been told is that one of the key components of that is one of the possibilities, they're going to look at a number of possibilities, is moving the 4th grade into that school so you can relieve some overcrowding at the elementary. I go back to 2017, 2018, the last time we had an effort in this town to add on space. We added numerous modulars. It was a little over $6 million. We're still paying for that. So when I look at things, I'm not saying, if I appear cautious when I look at these things, it's not that I don't want to have any new residents, don't want to have any new development. I'm just trying to wrestle with what is affordable, what can we do? And I think we all know it's going to take a Herculean effort to the select board pulling together with the school committee, school administration, town administration, all working to convince residents that we need to build this school, that our schools are aging. If that, it may take more than one try to get it passed, as we all know, with the history of Chelmsford. If that doesn't happen, then we have a problem. So I don't want to see us encourage tons of new units and then find out, oh, well, the schools, we have to be realistic. This is where school administration can guide us. How many students can you realistically fit in the elementary schools?
I think you just hit on the key, is the managed growth the vision for that has to be realistic.
Because if we have like a build baby build strategy, that might sound great, but if we can't accommodate those children, then we have, and then we look foolish as a planning board, in my mind.
Okay. So we will pick up this discussion next meeting. It sounds like there's sentiment on this board that we should own it.
Yeah.
I will commit to that and disagree.
Yeah.
But I will commit to that. Let's think about the task force for next meeting. We can start discussing that. We can talk about what the question is that we're going to answer. So take a look at that objective or the goal and the multiple objectives under it. And we'll have that discussion next meeting.
There's a couple of things I wanted to say. First of all, I think that what worked well for MBTA is that it was the full board that considered it together. And so while I agree that a task force is helpful and useful, on the other hand, I felt like where this board was really successful was when we were doing it together and where we had a very clear goal and a clear idea of what it is that we needed to do. So that I would think that would be an important element. The other thing too is that I'm still don't hear a consistent story among all the things that are said as to what is really driving this. And I think
That's why I was trying to dwell on the why.
yeah, no,
I
but
don't know how much more, at least personally.
even in what
speak,
you said, Evan, you said infrastructure, but then you said it's not just infrastructure, but it's this other stuff too.
Right.
So it's not just infrastructure, but infrastructure's important and likely the near term important or whatever. I guess what I'm trying to say is then you went on to say, and others have said too, this theme of building consensus, that we need to go out and we need to get people's ideas. I think that we need to establish that there is a problem and we need to quantify that problem. And I think that problem has to be translated into what specifically do we need to do, right? And in particular, what is the minimum we need to do? And then what is potentially some greater than the minimum that we might consider doing? And then as we consider scenarios about how to do that is where we would build consensus around these ideas of how we're going to do that. But I think there has to be, because if the perception is that we're interested in growth because we want to grow, we're automatically going to get resistance from that. And if we say that we want to increase infrastructure, people are immediately going to say, well, now all this growth is going to,
This is why I said
we're going to
that
turn it into a Somerville.
the town
And-
needs to identify the compelling public interest as to why it's identifying a goal.
So,
It-
yeah, and what I'm saying is essentially we need to quantify that. And I think that would be the first thing that we would want to do is to quantify that. And then I think we establish what are the kinds of,
There's a variety of
ways in which communities-
methodologies.
Yeah.
And in order to,
but to me that's essential because
Agreed.
that is going to be the thing that is going to give people the reason why they need to cooperate, is that we all agree, we all recognize the ship is sinking and we all need to start grabbing and bailing, and just how much are we bailing?
well, even that needs to be articulated. I mean, what I said today, was just high-level bullets. I don't think that's one. I'm not sure there's consensus as to the why that I articulated. But I agree with you. The town needs to clearly articulate the strategic why as to whatever the methodology is for the study that we're gonna hire a consultant for.
Yeah, and I think that my sentiment also about this board is that this board does things. It doesn't talk about doing things. It does talk about doing things, but it does things. And I think my only interest in this would be is if we come to a point where we are executing a plan, us through the things that we can control, other parts of town through what they control, but that we're doing it to achieve the objective, not just to talk about the objective. And so that would be my other interest, is not to participate in group discussions so that we can all get an idea that everybody agrees with. It's to develop specific plans about what we're going to do so that then we can execute them in the things that we do.
I agree with you, and I think the strategic plan started that.
Okay.
But I don't think it went far enough.
It did, but let me just give you an example where there was a disconnect. The strategic plan acknowledged and further encouraged the connection to MWRA. And then simultaneously acknowledged that we have this growth management strategy issue. So they're still operating on parallel paths at the same time. And yet we all know that you have to make a decision on one before the other. But yet it's been over a year, right, that the town's been pursuing the long-term wastewater solution.
And that's my point, is that the first half of this report starts what that vision is, but then it doesn't go deeper into how do we get
I'll
there.
only speak as a spectator for the strategic plan. One could easily come to the conclusion that the strategic plan, it wasn't a conflict for them, that they collectively support connection of MWRA, and then that's their starting point for a managed growth strategy. We didn't have that conversation.
No, I know, but from just reading it, it looks like that first half started what I think we're trying to get to, didn't go far enough, and then it said, these are all the other things that have to happen, I'll go do it at the same time.
It needs to be discussed at the same time, because they're all critically intertwined.
Right. But I think
Because
that's
as soon
the
as
piece that's
as soon
missing.
as the decision's made not to pursue MWRA, well, then the growth options, to John's point, are significantly
Yeah.
lower in scope and scale. They may not be high enough to achieve the desired outcomes, but they're not going to be.
But that's why we need to take that first half further and say, what is that vision? What are the
Correct.
detailed, how do we get there?
Right.
And then talk about, okay, how do we get from here to there?
Right. So it's, as everyone said, it's very complicated, but we need to start somewhere, and we need to agree on a methodology and a process.
Right.
If I may, I think what was unsaid but was sort of beneath it all is the affordability issue.
Yeah.
You've got a community that's aging, where your predominant population is going to be 55 and older, and then 60 and older. And what we heard at the Age-Friendly Initiative, which we've been part of, and these all things, is it's not sustainable. And so to sum up, I think what the problem is, to define the problem is, and it's not a revenue issue, it's an affordability issue. People can't afford to stay in the community, and yet their children can't afford to come into the community. And the problem is our commercial base has shrunken, not due to our fault, but because of the market. And so the point was, when we look at a Barica that's 60-40 residential commercial, and we're approaching 86%, 14%, and we're constrained, then it's an affordability issue. And that's really what, if you look at, and I can see it because I see what's going on in the community, when you assemble it all together, the whole goal was, how can we allow people to age in place in the community, be able to live in the community, have the housing stock and supply for the community, be able to educate our people. The problem is the problem is an affordability issue, because at the rate we're going, we're not going to be able to maintain the services as was talked about earlier, but you're not even going to be able to afford whatever the services that you have in the climate. Because if the push is housing from the state, and yet they're not even giving you inflationary increases of local partnership of state aid, then the problem that Chelmsford is going to have, and you're going to see happening to the communities around us, it's the affordability issue. And that's why the zoning is important, and that's why the planning board is important, and this whole effort is important, is because what it comes down to is we're not going to be able to maintain and afford the community and the characteristics and desires of what this community wants. And that's the core. And that's why this discussion has to take place, because if we keep drifting the way we're going, it's going to collapse in and of itself. And that is the core thing, because here's a community who has a history of not exceeding the constraints of Proposition 2.5, but yet Proposition 2.5 doesn't work in an inflationary environment. And then, as John noted earlier, how are we going to pay for a new middle school when the cost of that is going to be significant when you look at the cost to not only construct that school, but then to operate that school, and then the other inflationary and aspects that are going with it? That's the core problem.
Yeah.
And so it comes down to, you're right, what is all, it's like a presidential campaign. It's all about the economy, and in the local community, and this issue here is it's all about affordability. And the problem right now is we don't have that affordability solution, and we're constrained because we not only need to address that, but we need to afford the infrastructure, but then you need to be able to mitigate the ability to people to stay in the community in terms of their tax burden. And that's the crisis that we're in now that we weren't in 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It's the affordability question, and that's where it's struggling, and you're seeing, that's what you're going to just see unfold and unravel in the years ahead, is the young people can't afford to move in, and then the older ones are struggling to hang on because they don't have the housing options or the other options in which to remain. And I think that's the core problem. And therefore, I think the whole idea of the managed growth thing, it's not for the sake of growth, it's the strategic effort, or the comprehensive effort of how do we maintain the character of the community in order to maintain the affordability of the community and the values of what we want. And I think that's what it's going to come down to, and that's why the questions about that are staring at us are infrastructure questions: sewer infrastructure, water infrastructure, school infrastructure, and then the ability to provide the services that go with that. And that's where the question of the zoning comes in, and where the planning comes in, the economic development comes in. It's because, well, what are the good paying jobs? What are the high tax base? Because quite frankly, what we're seeing happening out there now is warehouse space, institutional rehab facilities. None of those are great job payers, nor contributors to the tax base. And so basically it's falling in upon itself, and that's where the discussion has to take place. That's the alarm bell. It's the affordability question. Is how do we provide the affordability for people to stay in the community, but also attract the commercial investment that is needed to support that?
Okay.
And right now, where we're unraveling is our commercial base is declining in terms of the percentage of the budget, as well as the type of commercial development that we're seeing coming into the community. So I think that's is the situation. And as Evan and I struggle with, is when people come in and they say, well, would this be acceptable to the community? And we're like, we don't know. Because it seems that anything now, because this anxiety that's out there, and it's not a Chelmsford issue, it's a societal, national issue. We're in a period now of anxiety, of change, and the flailing that's going around at the federal level and everything else is what are we to do? I mean, we've got to, look at what's happening right now at the state level. Well, we're adopting a state budget, but we may not know in August whether what we adopt in July is going to be viable, and therefore, we'll sit tight and hang on. I think it all comes down to affordability.
Okay. So that may be the question we have to answer. That is the problem of affordability. So, all right, we do need to move on. I want to thank Badri, Aaron, and Paul for coming tonight, for having a really good, honest discussion, and thank you guys. All right. We will continue the discussion on this topic next meeting. All right. Fall town meeting. Massage establishments. Evan, could you give us some context of this one? We were a little confused
Yep,
about this
yep,
one
I
last
did
meeting.
watch your
too.
last meeting. So the quick and simple recommendation from the building commissioner, working with council and consulting with me, is to go into the use table, remove the special permit, make it by right, and then revise and simplify the definition to eliminate the reference to the Board of Health and the exemptions. The backstory of this is, I've been here 18 years. When I first arrived, the commissioner and the zoning board were requiring and issuing special permits for each individual masseuse, because each individual masseuse was considered its own establishment. That's how that business works. They rent tables. Multiple masseuses are renting tables. That quickly transitioned to the next commissioner, who indicated that the definition clearly says that licensed professionals are exempt. It references the Board of Health. Well, the Board of Health no longer had regulations because it's a state license process. So we operated probably for 10, 12 years, whereby special permits were not required. And that worked out fine. New commissioner shows up, gives it a read, wants to make sure that he's implementing and administering the bylaw appropriately. He started requiring special permits. And then most recently, an applicant kind of questioned the whole thing. It was a relocation, someone who had a special permit in one location, but was relocating to a different location. The commissioner indicated, well, zoning's based upon address. It runs with the address, not with the person. So that's how the backstory to how this all came to be.
Okay.
Simple solution. Everyone agreed, myself, council, and the building commissioner. Go into the bylaw, make the official amendments so that it says the way it used to be administered. Don't require a special permit, and simplify the definition.
One of the things that came up last meeting was the potential issues with Board of Health. Is there any?
So as far as I'm aware, the Chelmsford Board of Health has no involvement.
Okay.
They don't have any local regulations. It is 100% state licensed. Whether the state does inspections or not, I don't know. The only rationale that I've heard over the last 18 years as to why a special permit provides any value is, one, that public health and safety is aware of the location, and two, they can do inquiries, so to speak. But as you likely know, if it's allowed by right, we still have the ability to share that information internally. So I don't see any glaring deficiencies from a public health or safety perspective. Again, as far as I can tell, the Board of Health is not directly involved in them like they are with a food establishment.
Joel, you were going to mention it at the Board of Health meeting. Did you?
Yeah, and they haven't met since then. They meet, I think, next week. Yeah, so I took the action to ask them. I could have emailed, but I didn't.
It's okay. So I think at this point we'll at least go on the assumption that they won't have any issues. If no one objects, we'll go with the recommendations for fall town meeting. I'll write that up along with all of the other zoning we have to put together. And then, Joel, if you can confirm it at the Board of Health meeting next.
It'll be
and
Tuesday
then-
next week, yeah.
And then we can discuss it at the public hearing that we have it.
Can I just ask a quick question? Does the state license the person or the establishment?
So, apparently there's been recent revisions to the state law. My understanding, and Becky in our office has some experience with this in a past professional career, is that they license the individual now. So that individuals can then take their license anywhere they want.
Is an esthetician like a person that does that
That's
type
a
of stuff?
separate license, yeah, the
Is
state
that a
license as
person
well.
or a?
I think it's also
Yeah,
a
it's a
person.
person.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
So
it
that's the
makes-
uniqueness with zoning. Zoning's an establishment. An
Yeah.
establishment isn't necessarily a
Yeah.
one person. So for purposes of masseuses, it's an awkward fit with zoning, particularly the way that industry's evolved.
And that's why it made sense they use the address, because for zoning, it matters where it is,
Right.
not
And so the
who's
most
doing
recent,
it.
the most recent example that came to a head with this was someone came in asking the building commissioner to sign a DBA. And so as part of a DBA, we do a baseline zoning review. And so that's what brought this to a head, is that it wasn't even a zoning application. No one was coming in asking to establish a new massage establishment at a new address. This was literally an existing masseuse who had a special permit at their original location, was changing locations, and needed a new DBA.
Was that Anita's masseuse that we heard about?
I was gonna say, I thought we heard a lot about that 2
We
weeks
heard a
ago.
lot
It was an
about
outside.
that, going across the street.
So I would view this as kind of housekeeping.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's just do it.
Even housekeeping
Yep.
articles at town
Yeah, you
meeting or
never
not.
know, but it sounds
Yep.
reasonable.
I want to make sure you all have the answers when they ask the questions.
Yeah, I can see
But
how this one's going to go at town meeting too.
Circling
implies
the
you're
Board of
not
Health
doing it?
is a
That
critical.
implies you're not presenting it?
And then maybe reaching out to police may be worthwhile as part of a town meeting process.
I could just see people questioning, like that whole thing of the establishment versus the person, right? Because it's a place that they're going to. You expect that place to be clean, if it's a place versus a person going to a certain area. So I just see when it's being brought to that meeting, potential.
Yeah, well, I think
Ask.
in your engagement with Board of Health, ask them if they get a complaint, what do they do with it? Do they have jurisdiction? Do they have other inspection abilities that are above and beyond the state license?
Yeah, that would be my question. Are they like inspected, like not monthly, but like yearly,
Yeah,
just to
that-
make sure?
Yeah, the question I was going to ask is, does the Board of Health inspect massage establishments? Are there rules and regulations they
I mean, they
apply?
don't inspect my office.
Are you a masseuse?
No, I'm a
Okay,
physician.
well, there you go.
Board of Health, you might think.
I know, you would think that they would want to ensure that those places are clean,
I think
But estheticians,
if
they
the
don't
Ch-
inspect either.
If the
State
Chelmsford Board of
boards.
Health had the legal authority, I think their preference is to have it the way it used to be. A local license, local inspection, local regulation.
But
My
they don't.
understanding is that that's been taken away from them.
Yeah.
It's just interesting.
And any support they could give us at town meeting would be appreciated too.
Right.
I'll make a note of that, too.
All right. All right. State planning grant.
So, I'm actively in the system, filling out the state planning grant application. I had mentioned to Chris about a week or so ago via email that, based upon tonight's conversation, we collectively may want to consider pivoting from the original idea of applying for zoning consultant services to help the planning board with the use tables and definitions and zoning conflicts, to applying for funding to advance the growth management strategy process. So I, love to hear ideas, thoughts on that. The funding request for either option was going to be around $80,000 with a 25% local match. I think for the zoning exercise, I think that's likely adequate funding, more than adequate funding. For the strategic plan, I don't have a real good sense. One, I think we're struggling with still what's the scope, what's the methodology. I'm actively in conversations with several consultants who have participated in growth management related documents. So I expect to have a better handle on that. Either option, I don't see Chelmsford getting more than 80 to 100,000.
Yeah.
Just a politically viable
Yeah.
request.
I mean, it seems like 100,000 would 80-20 would be a
So my
reasonable dollar amount.
recommendation or suggestion is that I think the planning board can handle the land use and zoning exercise in-house. I think we just successfully did that with Kate's Corner. The advantage with hiring a consultant is that presumably the planning board would want to take one huge bite and bring it all to town meeting at the same time.
Yeah.
That strategically may not be a good strategy for any type of comprehensive zoning changes. On the strategic plan, I think it goes without saying, we collectively are not able to facilitate that
No.
independently and in-house, regardless of who would lead it. I think it warrants some sort of consultant services.
Expertise.
Whether those are technical, related to growth scenarios and fiscal impact,
And even
or if
methodology.
it's simply facilitation.
Yeah.
How much was the NEMCOG facilitation for our MBTA stuff? How much did that come out to?
I think the value was probably like 35,000. NIMCOG provides a very good bang for the buck. They're certainly significantly lower than traditional planning type consultants. With the land use and zoning exercise, we still have the ability to apply and work with NIMCOG. I don't suggest that NIMCOG or any RPA for that matter would be the best consultant option for a growth management strategy. My initial sense in looking at the Stratford and some others is that some of the analysis is can be rather technical.
Yeah.
And it may require multidisciplinary consultant firms. Again, this all depends on what's the detail of the scope and scale of the methodology that the town really wants to pursue, and what can we actually get for $100,000.
Yeah.
I mean, the main thing that I thought that we were trying to do with the study was not so much for the zoning part, because I think we felt like we could handle that reasonably, but that it was because we didn't have insight into the market and what the market trends might be and how that matched with what potential zoning actions could be done to promote that. That's the piece that we really needed expert advice on, which is basically some market knowledge, so somebody who's aware of what the market is and somebody who's able to project a market, a reasonable, guess is better than we do. And then also is able to say this kind of zoning promotes this kind of growth, this kind of zoning promotes that kind of thing. That's what we needed. But for the for the growth management, we really need, I think, a wider range of skill sets in the sense of you're doing estimations of population growth, you're doing estimations of basically, again, some sort of idea of commercial growth and needs. And you're also looking at projections on infrastructure. You're also doing financial forecasts in terms of, the kind of burdens that we'll be facing to put the whole financial picture together, because ultimately this is all going to come down to, Paul said affordability, and I agree with him. It's about affordability, but the only variable in the things that he listed was revenue that's generated by commercial businesses. That's the one that he's still that's the variable that we need to look at. So I think that for the purposes of being able to identify in a broad view, what are the different things that we need to be having going on, right? That skill set to help us to be able to identify what those things are is, I think, a more general skill set than this more specific skill set that we need, that is particularly related to our economic market area and what kinds of zoning would promote that. Those are the things I think we need to have.
I agree with you, and I think that if we're going to spend time on getting a grant and spending money, I would rather do it on the strategic piece first. Muddle along with the zoning on our own, and then after the strategic is done, then if we have more time and energy and grants available, we can do another grant to do more of that
I agree with
market
that.
stuff in
But I think
relation
we're
to
going to
the
need
strategic.
both.
Yeah.
I think we're going to need professional assistance in both.
Yeah, but I would prioritize the,
I would too. I
Strategic,
agree with you,
okay.
because we first need to be able to frame the problem in order to know
Yeah.
what is the commercial zoning part that's going to fit in with that.
yeah. All right, so does everyone agree that we should
Yeah.
shift the
Yeah.
focus to the strategy?
Let's do it.
Yep.
Strategic
All
plan?
right, so then I'm on track to submit that by the end of next Wednesday.
Okay.
It's not a heavy lift, and as Joel knows, the amount of characters allowed for each question is very limited.
Characters, not words, characters. Does
These
it,
small words.
is the statement of work or performance work statement or whatever it is it very specific? Or
So they
like the
do,
scope of the work?
they do ask for a scope of work, basically articulating the tasks.
Right,
I'm in the process of developing that. I'll try to keep it as kind of generic as possible,
yeah,
but still hitting the,
yes,
yeah.
that's what I was gonna
Essentially, the state wants the scope to justify the budget.
right. Is the scope going to be, are they doing essentially a technical review of the scope in order to assess the goodness of the proposal, or are they just looking for something that provides some level of justification for the money that we're asking for?
That's the primary line of questioning.
Okay.
There's also a secondary question that asks, to what extent has your scope and budget been reviewed by a planning consultant?
Okay, all right. Yeah, so just make it as generic as
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
So we have flexibility in how we actually allocate that.
Yeah, and I have the Stratford, Ontario RFP as to work with as a baseline. The town of Hingham apparently has something similar, and I just learned today that the town of Marlborough also has something similar. So I'm in the process of tracking those down, and I'll be able to cobble together.
When would that get awarded?
So the state decisions don't come out until fall.
Okay.
Contracting wouldn't be till late fall, early winter.
Okay, so our earliest we could bring somebody on is winter. Okay, so that gives us plenty of time to get set up to essentially get them pointed in the right direction. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Sounds good. All right. Liaison updates. Mike, anything?
Nothing here.
Joel? John?
So I attended a NIMCOG meeting on May 21st. They adopted their annual budget. They did a bylaw update. One of the more interesting things that I wanted to share is at the end of the meeting, they have a like a sharing session where the reps from each community share what's going on in their communities. And the Lowell Planning Board member talked about, if you're familiar at all with the area on Plain Street where the Target store is in Lowell, there's a old VFW property that's been that's sold, and it's going to be redeveloped. And the planning board member said that the businesses have changed numerous times, but they've approved it to have 3 fast food restaurants. I believe it was Chipotle, Popeyes, and Starbucks, if I have my names right. And one of the interesting part of this whole thing is they said that either one or two of those restaurants are gonna have, they can only, you have to basically order using your phone or online before you get there. They won't have, they don't have, so that it's a smaller type of facility, so you can't pull up and there's not an employee to take your order. So I just thought I would throw that out there maybe for the future, if that's something we
So like
would
they're gonna have
consider.
what, like, I know up on 101A in Nashua, they had like this very small one, so it's just drive through, it's quick, simple. A lot of people like do the quick mobile app, pick it up and on the go.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a condensed down
Yeah.
version. You do have to order online. So I just thought I'd throw that out there for the future as possibly something to look at. But I found that interesting. That's all I have.
Okay.
Or
Deirdre?
nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing, not the next
Wow. All right.
Just all for you, Chris.
Concom met last night. It was one of the longest meetings I've seen them do.
Did you say that 2 weeks ago too?
Oh, it was really long last night. It was 11:15. Old Westford Road, they passed that development with conditions. Subsurface stormwater installation needs to be witnessed by DPW. 25-foot setback markers on the property, probably a fence or something. And then Lot A pinning their footing since it's really close to the 50-foot setback. That's why I was really surprised that ours continued because theirs passed last night. They had extensive NOI hearings on Freeman Lake, 2 hearings, one for eco-harvesting and then one for a more comprehensive management plan, including chemicals. And that went on forever, and it is continued to June 10th. And then they're going to be, their regulation subcommittee meeting is next week. All right. 270 Billerica Road. Evan and Joel?
Yeah. And actually, it says in the agenda, update on MCP compliance requirements, and that is not exactly true. It's about compliance with the RAM plan that was part of our, I believe it was part of our conditions on the decision. But anyway, in that plan, as far as handling contaminated soil, because they
Quite a pile of it.
particularly in the areas where groundwater had risen and the groundwater is contaminated, so the assumption is the soil's contaminated that the groundwater went to. And so then they sort of identified what the level that they thought that was going to be at, which we more or less compromised on. And so they hold that in a pile, and they do soil testing then to determine whether it's contaminated or not. And if it is not contaminated, then they can reuse it on the site. And if it is contaminated, then they truck it off or do something. I don't know what it's in the plan. Anyway, so while they have this pile supposed to be covered, just to prevent, it blowing, or if there's rain to keep it from, basically infiltrating it further out or what's seeping them, all that sort of stuff. Like, just makes sense. Keep it covered. Well, if you recall for those of you who were there, if you recall during the hearing, I mentioned that I had this vision that it would be a weekend, I'd be driving by, and it would be pouring rain, and the cover would be flapping in the wind. And I said that. And so sure enough, it wasn't raining, but it was not covered. And I had read it was very windy, and I had read the field reports that we had gotten, and so I was aware that there was a pile and then it was covered, supposed to be covered. And I was just driving by and I looked over and I go, oh, that must be the pile. And then there's cover's just pulling all off it. So I emailed Evan. I said, can you follow up with the beta to ask them, basically look into this? And so then it came up again, and the word got back. Yes, they were aware of it. That they had talked with Ed Weigel, who was the LSP, if you remember, who appeared before us, and that he was working with
Again, it happened twice.
Yes. So then they had it. Then after the first time, I saw it. Even though I hadn't heard back, I saw it covered, and they had an excavator with the hook or the bucket of the excavator on top of it. So I thought, Okay, it's a little extreme, but just a sandbag would have done fine. But I guess it was just for flair, so you can see that it actually
Didn't they
was
have
being
it like
held down.
staked down on the corners?
Well, they should be. It's a little bit far in the back, so I can't actually go up and see it. But nonetheless, when I went by again, a later time, it was partially uncovered, and so again, emailed again, heard back from Rob, and then Rob mentioned that they were dealing with it, and so then in this exchange of emails that included Chris and also David Kuntz, I mentioned that and so I mentioned to Chris that we might consider putting it as an agenda item just so we can all catch up on what's going on. But then also I emailed Rob Smith, and I said, if let us know if you need any help making this a priority for the contractor. So we have not heard back. So I don't know if it's under control at this point in Beta's mind or not.
And Rob is
But
the LSP?
Rob Smith is the LSP for Beta. Yeah, so he's Beta just has done a tremendous job, and I've been so happy with Rob Smith. He said that the contractor had said, well, it's about to be, we're about to get the test results anyway, and Rob Smith's reaction was, yeah, but you have to keep it covered until you get it back. You can't just assume results of the test before you get them back. So, nonetheless, glad that we have Beta on board, that they're doing their job.
Conscientious.
They're conscientious. They're doing off hours inspections and so forth. So I'm glad. So a shout out to Beta, and also that hopefully communicating to the contractor and to others that the board takes its conditions seriously. So
And did the test results come back?
I haven't heard.
I haven't heard either.
I haven't heard.
I did mention this at the Concom meeting, and Mark Gibbs mentioned that he noticed a soil for sale sign on the front fence of that property. Do we know where they're selling the soil from?
Maybe they should
That's
wait till
another call
the
to Beta now.
test result comes back. Are you making it funny?
No, he actually saw a soil for sale sign. He
I
doesn't know
don't-
if it's still there,
I don't recall seeing it.
but he did see it at one point, and I didn't know if it's something we should have with Rob follow up on.
I mean, they're following the plan.
Or, okay.
Clean fill one
Uh,
I told Mark that
or a PFAS one.
I'd bring it up tonight. in ca-
unless, well, Beta's there to make sure they're following the plan.
Okay.
But if the sign says "Go take some from under the tarp in the back," then I think we'd have a case.
Yeah, practice is not uncommon. This is the first time I'm hearing of it in Chelmsford. But it has been used in other towns. In some towns, it has become a zoning issue. And in other towns,
The selling of
it's
soil?
a trucking issue based upon the scope and scale of the operation, the development. Fortunately, I think in Chelmsford, 270 is not of scope and scale, where we haven't received any complaints of trucks coming and going with, buying or purchasing,
Ledge
I
Road.
assume, soil.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect that would be normally an issue, but with contaminated soil, maybe an issue?
Agreed. Well, I mean, what came to my mind was just a zoning violation or a neighborhood nuisance with added trucks. But yeah, the uniqueness of this site is, yeah.
Yeah, as
You should
as
wait
bad
for
as
the
it
test
appears,
results before they sell it.
the contaminated soil is being segregated. According to the plan, the soil is to be segregated, and
okay,
and Beta is there to confirm that they are following the plan.
all right.
But you just said, I don't know, they chuck it away somewhere, I don't know where. Or sell it on the open market.
All right. So do we need to do anything or follow up or anything on this?
No, I mean, I probably, if you don't hear back, I probably would want to hear back from
Okay,
Rob.
I'll email Rob,
Yeah.
ask for an update.
That would be nice.
Okay. Excellent. All right, where are we at?
Meeting minutes.
Meeting minutes. April 9th. I did see an error on April 9th. I think it had John and Joel both nominated for vice chair.
Oh, I didn't even notice that.
Oh, yeah. I missed that too. I think because I knew what they voted for, I just.
So maybe Becky can change that on page 1 that Joel was nominated and carried for clerk as opposed to vice chair.
Joel nominated as clerk, you said?
Yep.
Yeah.
Nominated
Bottom
and
of
voted,
page
right?
1.
You couldn't guess it. What does the clerk do? Anyway,
Okay.
You missed it too.
I read stuff.
That was the only issue I saw. So I'll take a motion.
Make a motion to accept with that correction.
Second.
Motion from John, second by, who said it? Deirdre?
Deirdre.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous? Any issues with the 23rd? If not, I will take a motion.
I'll make a motion to accept the meeting minutes of April 23rd as presented.
Motion by John,
Second it.
second by Marcy. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous? And May 14th, the only issue I saw there was Joel's report. And Joel, please confirm if this is correct. The second bullet says no known progress on the 21E study for Hillman House, 40B.
Hildreth.
That's what I thought.
Hildreth Street.
Hildreth
Well,
Project.
is this Hildreth project? Yeah, not Hillman House 40B.
Yeah, Hildreth Project as opposed to Hillman House 40B Project.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of May 14th with that correction.
Second.
Motion by Deirdre, second by Mike. All in favor? Aye. Unanimous? All right, next meeting will be June 11th. We will cover the 55 to 59 Middlesex zoning map area. So Evan, if you could have that zoning map sent out so we could take a look at it in that immediate vicinity,
Mm-hmm.
similar to what we did with
Kate's Corner.
Kate's Corner. Depending on how that goes, we can start to identify other areas where we may apply this zone. And then we'll talk about the strategic plan. And then I do want to kind of start talking about the timeline for Fall Town Meeting. So we get our ducks in a row for that really lengthy public hearing process for all of those articles. And so we can get before the right boards in time.
And you have a new public hearing opening for 300 Billrica Road?
Yep. Is that coming June 11th?
Yes.
All right. I think that's it. So
I move to adjourn.
Second.
motion by Mike, second by John. All in favor?
Aye.
Good night.